are and everywhere in the world. Okay, so let me start by introducing myself. My name is Sui. I'm a research technician based in the SAFE project, which is located in Tawau, Sabah, Malaysia. So today I'll just share a bit about my work at the SAFE project on non-flying small mammals. So specifically, I'm only going to be talking about rats, tree shrews, and squirrels. So I'm just going to give you a general introduction of what is the SAFE project about and what kind of small mammal work we do at the SAFE project. Okay, so the SAFE project, for those of you who are familiar with Tawau, it is situated in the Kalabakan Forest Reserve, which is next to two major oil palm estates called the Benta Wawasan and the Sabah Softwood area. And for those of you who are not familiar at all with Tawau or the Sabah area, so basically it is a project located inside a forest reserve, which is connected to the back to two major conservation areas, Malyal Basin and the Danum Valley, that is very famous. And where the latest tallest tree is found. So the entire area of SAFE project has been selectively logged twice in the 1970s and the 1990s. So we actually refer to this area as a very heavily logged forest, and it covers an area of 7,200 hectares. So this area, we call it our experimental area because eventually after our research is done, this whole area is going to be converted into an oil palm plantation as well. So in our heavily logged experimental landscape, this is how the layout looks like. So all the areas that you see in gray will eventually all be converted and planted with oil palm, leaving the black spots and the green areas, which will eventually turn into isolated little forest fragments. So you can see, so this is the whole layout of how the SAFE landscape looks like. So when we talk about heavily logged forest, heavily logged tropical forest, this is what we are basically looking at, and this is basically my office. So you see lots of lianas, very, very dense understory, lots of climbers. So it's a very difficult landscape to work in and to get around. And also there have been lots and lots of logging roads, and they're generally very open, and you can see very little trees. So it's really hot in this landscape. So one question you can think about is, can mammals or generally any animal survive in such an environment, and will they want to live in such an environment? So one of our most basic questions at the SAFE project is we are asking how are animal communities affected by this land use conversion? So we work in the log forest of SAFE project. We have a control site, also our primary forest site. We work in the Malyal Basin conservation area, and we use the oil palm, nearest oil palm estate, our neighbors, as basically our oil palm site. So one of the questions, for example, can small mammals live in the oil palm? Okay, our second question when it comes to logging and oil palm plantations and everything is the next reality that always happens is forests become fragmented. So what happens when continuous forests undergo logging? What you'll have left behind is forests in tiny patches. So in these forests, tiny patches of forest, how much area does an animal need to survive? If they can't survive in this forest, what happens to them? Do they become locally extinct? Or would they move, and can they adapt to stay in the oil palm? And if they become extinct locally in that area, what happens to the forest there? What happens to the whole ecosystem? What are we actually losing when we lose, for example, small mammals or other animals, or basically when you lose everything, what happens to the forest? So why study small mammals? Maybe a lot of people think that. My parents asked me as well, why are you catching rats in the jungle? So small mammals, so generally across the rainforest, the main job of small mammals are to, as seed predators, so they feed on a lot of seeds. They also carry the seeds they find at a spot, they move them and they store them in their burrows, in their nests for later consumption. That action is called hoarding. So small mammals such as rats, they will take seeds from one spot, move them and burrow and keep them. So this action actually allows the seed to be removed from their original spot to a far distance away. And also sometimes these seeds end up germinating when conditions become favorable. So this allows for forest regeneration. And so small mammals help with maintaining the basically the flora in jungle. And also, so thirdly, small mammals, they're important prey. So lots of cats that we are interested in, like clouded leopards, marble cats and stuff. They feed on quite a lot of small mammals such as rats, tree shrews, squirrels, the civets, the snakes, the birds of prey. They all also feed on small mammals. So for research, small mammals, on average, many species, they live between 3 to 5 years. So as a researcher, it's easy to study, let's say, disturbance, what happens after logging, or let's say after a major El Nino. It's easy to see what happens to the population. Also, people use small mammals such as rats for studies on pesticide use and bioaccumulation of toxins in the environment as well. So the other thing is small mammals, similar to birds, they move a lot within the landscape. They're highly mobile. So this makes them an important or a useful representation of what is happening in the forest floor. So, and then another personal reason to study them because simply they're cute. So you get to see when we think about rats in the jungle, they do not look anything like the rats we find in the cities. And also, some of them, like the squirrels and tree shrews, they're just cute and they generally have better PR. And it's easier to convince people to conserve tree shrews, squirrels than rats in general. So how do we trap them? So we use a method called mark and recapture that we've been using since the start of the project in 2011. So we have a mammal grid with 96 traps in 48 points. And we use a cage trap, which is usually what most people will buy and use in their houses to trap rats. So we bake them with palm oil fruit and we check them for 6 continuous nights. So every morning we check for the presence of an animal, we do species ID, we weigh them, we determine their gender, and also we do physical measurements just to confirm the species ID. So the other thing we do is we pig tag our individuals. If you can see in the top corner of a tiny pig tag the size of a rice grain. So we insert that into the individuals with a unique biometric number so that we identify individuals. And over the years, we accumulate data where they've got, so we can find out how long have they lived, how long are we recapturing them, and we can differentiate with new individuals. So these are some of pictures just to share. We have a 4-striped ground squirrel that's temporarily sedated. We have a white-hazed rat that we are weighing, and also a large tree shrew. So one of the key findings from our data so far shows that we've detected more number of species in log forests as compared to the primary forest and in the oil palm. So for example, if those of you who are familiar with Bornean small mammals, for example, like species such as the brown spiny, you're unlikely to find them in the oil palm estate because they're sensitive to logging, disturbance, and they prefer good forest quality. While species such as the white-headed rat, they can be found towards the land use, so throughout the land use, sorry. So you find them in oil palm all the way to primary forest. Same with low squirrels. So they're generalist species, so they're quite happy living in all sorts of land use. So on the top corner of the table is just separating them out based on whether they're rats, tree shrews, or squirrels, based on their species numbers. So just to show you this visually, it's just to show that the log forest species overlaps with the primary and the oil palm species. So because we do long-term studies, we are able to monitor population densities of small mammals over the years. So this is data from 2011 right up to 2018. I haven't put in 2019's data yet. So you can see, for example, in Borneo, we experienced a very, very strong El Nino, late 2015 to 2016. And then you can see a decline in the population across all land use. So what our data is strongly suggesting is log forest retains quite a high number of mammal species. So basically, for small mammals and mammals generally, they are very happy to be in log forest as opposed to somewhere like in the oil palm. Okay. So to date, we are on our 10th year of data collection in this landscape, but there are still many unanswered questions about small mammals. Like we do not know actually what are they feeding on in logged forests. So we don't exactly know about their diet, and we don't know what are the long-term impacts of the roads on their population. Are they able to move within this landscape? What happens to squirrels and tree shrews with the lack of trees? Temperature, and also if small mammals are moving towards the oil palm and they can survive in the oil palm, will they be regarded as pests? And so will they be able to survive in the long term in these modified landscapes? So most of our research, what happens to them to ensure that we have impact on the ground is we work closely with NGOs, government agencies to be able to translate our research into better management practices for logging, for forestry and agriculture through the Roundtable of Sustainable Palm Oil, and also for conservation purposes. So actually this is the end of my very short presentation. So I conclude with showing you this picture from the SAFE landscape. What I would like to say is this is your typical reality of what most tropical rainforests look like outside protected areas. So although such landscapes may not be your first choice to look for mammals, you would not think about going to these areas first to look for mammals or for ecotourism potential development here. These are especially, our data has been showing that these areas still harbor lots of biodiversity, especially, for example, for small mammals, which play an important role in the ecosystem. So these areas certainly have high conservation value, and we still need more research to fully understand these altered forest ecosystems to better make better management decisions. Okay.
Thank you.
Short.
Thank you, Sui. Is that a moon rat?
Yes, the bycatch.
Bycatch. Maybe you can stop your screen for a second.
Shock.
Stop sharing. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, stop sharing the screen in a nice way. It's like an order. Okay. So thank you so much, Sui, for this very informative talk today on small mammals. You know, even my personal knowledge on small mammals is very limited, and as you said it earlier regarding your parents' question about you, and my friends and family think, you know, small mammals, rats of the jungle are the same rats in town. So it's very interesting what you've shared. I actually have several questions too, but now, guys, this is the floor is open for a discussion. Okay, so how we're going to do this question session is bottom of your screen, you will see a button called reaction. Click button reactions, and there's the thumbs up will pop up. So if you have a question, you can ask, and you can unmute yourself after that, and then you can ask a question. Yeah, some people's screen isn't microphone isn't working, so they can type, but if possible, it will encourage a discussion. Chun has a question. I know his microphone isn't working. So Chun's question is, I wonder why there are more species of small mammals in log forests compared to primary, and are the population density higher as well compared to primary rainforest?
Thank you for your question, Jun. I will just reply here. So we think that there are more small mammals in the log forest because simply most small mammals have a wide range of food they consume for their diet. So actually most of them in terms of diet, they're more generalist. So in log forest, because of all the pioneer species, all the open gaps, basically a lot of young plants and shoots can all easily grow up. So there's actually lots of continuous food supply available in terms of seeds, flowers, fruits, as opposed to most what you call primary rainforest or old growth forest like Malia or Danum, your nice pretty rainforest, usually they follow masting and flowering fruiting cycles. So there are seasons of high food availability and seasons of low food availability as compared to log forest that is available all throughout the year.
Thank you, Sui. Sui, do you think this key findings you have from the log forest and primary and the palm oil forest, do you think it's valid and relevant for other species as well, like the bigger mammals as well? Like, for example, Jess works with squirrels, flying squirrels especially. Do you think in log forest there's higher species diversity?
So that is a gap as far as I know from the tropical forest of this side of the world and Borneo and stuff. We really do not know what's happening in the trees. So when we talk about log forest, we have only examined, and most people have only examined what happens on the ground. So we've observed similar higher number of species found in log forest for mammals that spend time on the ground, so using our camera trap data. So the same can be said for, like, let's say pigs, deers, elephants and stuff like that. But then when it comes to what's happening on top in the trees, it's a whole different story. And there's been very few studies focusing on arboreal mammals till Jess came around. So Jess can continue answering this question about arboreal mammals if she wants to come in.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm quite at the stage of being able to answer that yet. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what is going on between arboreal mammals in logged forests versus unlogged forests. But like you said, Sui, because there's not really been any arboreal research, or not very much, in Borneo so far, a lot of my research is focused just on trying to figure out the methods to use to study them, and whether those are valid. And so I have got a comparison between logged and unlogged forests, but it's only, it's one area of unlogged and one area of logged. So while you can draw some conclusions from that, you have to be careful, because as Chavez was saying, perhaps it's not clear yet whether that generalizes to other areas. But you've done some, because you've in terms of larger mammals that Chavez was just asking you about, you've done some camera tapping right across the three areas. So yeah. Have you found similar trends for larger mammals between logged forest, unlogged forest, and oil palm?
Yes, so it's consistent for large mammals that spend time on the ground. So you get a larger range of species, basically higher species diversity in log forest as opposed to the primary forest, and definitely more than in oil palm. Mm. Obviously, the general rule is you always lose the very sensitive species, the rare and sensitive species you're unlikely to find in our heavily logged forest. And you'll find them only in primary forest, but then the rest, like the elephants, especially the large herbivores that we have in Borneo, they're all more than happy to be in logged forest.
Yes, so do you think, so one of my questions is, I actually have 5 questions, but I'll ask one at a time. One question is this key findings, right, which you just shared earlier on, even now, that in log forest, sometimes the diversity increases, certain animals love it more, and even they're small mammals. Do you think this would be a sensitive finding to share to the public, because it might give the logging companies and plantations justifications to log more? They say, hey, we're not really hurting the environment, we're just going to help the environment even more. Do you think this kind of information should be revealed publicly as well, because it might just give more justification even for the government? They might be like, what, logging isn't that bad.
So all of this data actually is in published papers. So it's already generally known in the public among the scientific community that do mammal work, especially in camera trapping and stuff, that log forests generally, basically most mammals are quite happy in log forests. So, but what we do a lot of times with our data and stuff like that, like I mentioned, we do engage with stakeholders, and then we do update the Sabah Biodiversity Council that yes, mammals generally are quite happy in log forest, but we stay clear from saying doesn't necessarily mean please log all the forest. It has to be properly managed, and the reality is, more importantly, is most areas outside protected areas have been already logged anyway. Most of it generally in Sabah and most of Borneo. Areas that could have been logged have already been logged in the 1990s or the early 2000s. So what we are trying to advocate here with our data more is there is conservation value to be to maintain and preserve logged over forest. Not saying that, hey, it's log forest, there's going to be very few mammals, please convert it to oil palm or housing development. So
Yeah.
that is the stronger message that we're bringing.
No, no, that is great, and you're right. The knowledge is there already in the scientific world, and even some mammal watchers. It's just that there might be some cheeky politician out there, to justify their claim. That's why Chun just
Yeah.
commented. He said that is why Dramacot is so successful with mammal watching, which is true. Dramacot is mammal watching haven, and and bird watching as well, because just do so many night drives and see amazing wildlife.
Yeah, so the difference is, you see, in the Ramacord, you can find clouded leopards everywhere. You find the more rare cryptic species, like what the otter silver and stuff, which you can almost never find. I mean, you can see clouded leopards very rarely in the SAFE project and stuff. You can really see the difference between the Ramacord is a reduced impact logging site. So it's a well-managed logging ideal model that the government's actually using to understand the impacts of logging to biodiversity and everything else, compared to a place like SAFE project that has been heavily logged, and almost you rarely see trees at times in some forest patches.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's a good model to compare the data between these different forest management practices. And we feed back all this to forestry to show them, look, we still get this amount of mammals, but we're not getting things like pangolins and otter civets and your clouded leopards and stuff in our landscape.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
hopefully, yeah.
Yes. Mala has a question, but I just want to say something to the people who are tuning in from abroad. Again, if you didn't get it, so Google Borneo, and then you see on Borneo, on east coast of Borneo, which is Sabah, and on the east coast of Sabah is this project site. Where Sui is based and some of us are based. So I just want to give you a geographical idea where we are right now. So just wanted to share for the other people. Okay, Mala, what's your question?
It's not really a question. It's just that, just to add on to Sui's point earlier on about, I think with logged forests, I think like you mentioned earlier, biodiversity is the key point. So that's the biggest point I think you have to sell when you want to keep the natural jungles, because the biodiversity in these jungles are definitely higher than the log forest. For example, we take the similarities in coral reefs. So when a storm comes and destroys the corals, we find that the rubble coral encourages other corals to grow, but then what happens is species diversity is lost. Same or similar species of coral just starts growing all over, and it becomes a big garden of same corals and not different corals. Probably that's what happens as well. I'm taking the similarity, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm more marine biologist than land. So basically, I think that's where you lose the biodiversity, I think, if I'm correct, Sui.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. There's also I mean, theoretically, there's the mid-level of disturbance promotes the most biodiversity, but it also reaches a threshold, and after that threshold is reached, you really see, like you said, just that same few species. So in some areas of our log forest, that is just grassland, we just see that same few pigs, and that's it. Nothing else really.
Next.
Okay, so any Sui, your second slide, it was regarding forest fragmentation, I think.
Yeah.
So did you already share the result for that? Do you have the answer to that?
Oh, not yet, because we so for forest fragmentation experiment to be complete is when these forest fragments become isolated. So that means when oil palm is truly planted around these forests. So that is what we are waiting to happen, which hopefully one day will happen. We're still waiting for a lot of paperwork to be done. So the ideal world is, now we are collecting data of what happens before forests become fragmented. So ideally, when after oil palm comes in, we'll have these little islands of forest to understand what happens to these same mammals that we are monitoring now, what happens to them after they get isolated by oil palm, if that's a bit clear. Yeah.
It's just that there's so many wildlife corridors popping up now in Borneo, and like even us, we work on 2 wildlife corridors. So the question is, are they going to be really effective in the future? Especially so if you have the answer or done some research in your forest if you have the answer to that, it might be really helpful, and it might even give a further boost motivation to people working on these wildlife corridors, trying to connect these fragmented forests.
Yeah, so that is one thing that was one of the aims of SAFE project, to understand what happens to these animals when they are fully isolated, so that we can provide the information to, let's say, boards like RSPO and stuff, to understand that we need to advocate that we need to connect and have corridors to connect these populations to the greater populations, and then to continuous forest. So we are doing the opposite of what we want, to try to show them the data was ideally one of the hypotheses. And also we also have in our landscape that I didn't mention at all is riparian corridors. That's something quite a number of people have done work on, to see what mammals are actually using these riparian corridors between these future fragments as well.
Mhm. Thank you, Sue. Does anybody have more questions or comments? Please raise your hand or unmute yourself, please. Yes, Danielle.
I'm interested, how did you get involved in the project, and how did you realize that you were interested in small mammals?
Sweet, I think that was a question for you, Sui. Sui, are you still there?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me, Daniel?
I can hear you.
Okay, so I'll just answer. It's all right. Chavez doesn't need to know.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me now, Chavez?
Oh, it was me. Was it
Yeah.
my internet? Okay, all right. Okay, sorry, my bad.
so so yeah, this SAFE project has been running since late 2010, 2011, and Imperial College is heavily involved in this project. So I did a master's with Imperial College. So then my supervisor, he's actually the principal investigator for this project. So that's how I got involved. Before that, I had no idea. I've never handled any small mammals in my life. I was studying pitcher plants before this and sorting insects. So yeah.
Thanks.
Sweet is a question by Chun. Do you think direct site observation to find small mammals is considered a valid method to collect data for your research, since you're only doing bait trapping and camera trapping?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I mean, there are many methods you could use. You could do live. So there are people who are against live trapping as well, as being very invasive, and you run through a lot of ethical issues. Other methods you could use is also just doing line transects, or you can also do radio coloring, which is much more expensive. So there are limitations. It's not absolute, but we've considered all the methods that are available. And using bait trapping, we also admit that using palm oil as a bait, you're just actually selecting for a certain subset of small mammals that actually would go for this bait. But we've tried many other baits, and this seems like the most pragmatic option available. And also camera trapping, we select camera trapping because it's the gold standard basically for mammal observations and mammal studies, and it's passive, so we're not actually altering anything or not baiting them or not luring them. So we're just putting them randomly in a grid to see what's passing through.
So we found some small mammals or rats on our camera traps, but for us it's just like a white line shine. So if we send you the pictures, you can help identify.
Yeah, I should be able to. So yeah, like what Chun mentioned as well. So you know about the shrews better than I do. I've never caught a shrew in my life. And with shrews, you really need to use pitfall. So it's a different kind of trap. So there are limitations to every method, and you can't. There's no one method, one size fits all.
Yeah, we still have. You're right. Like the Hoses pygmy shrew, which we found that day, it was a new record for Tawau, and it's like 100 species number 104 now for Tawau, mammal wise, and it's so small, and so we have it in the museum now. So yeah, I mean, Chun says pitfall trapping. Is it a good method to do your small mammal survey as well?
So because we are targeting small mammals of larger size, and then as far I don't know too much about pitfall trapping, but I understand that mortality can be quite high with the shrews as well, right? So we are just following a standardized small mammal trapping method that they use like in many other long-term studies around the world. But I don't know too much about comparing pitfall trapping with small mammal trapping in terms of cage trapping. But generally, it's also a standard that most people use live trapping with metal cages for small mammal surveys.
Thank you. Does anybody have any more questions or comments or discussions, topics? Just raise your hand or, sorry, unmute yourself.
Arboreal rodents. Yes. Oh, yes. So that's
hello.
another.
So
No.
Jaya Raj
Arboreal.
Vijaya has a question here. How did you sample arboreal rodents?
Oh God, yeah, that's difficult. Actually, I found so camera traps, if you set them on the ground, generally the way that you'd set them, you're generally targeting sort of medium to large animals, and sometimes, as you guys say, that you get some rats or squirrels on them, but they're quite often hard to identify. And if you're particularly targeting small mammals on the ground, you generally would set the camera trap at a slightly different angle. So in the trees though, in the canopy, I found that setting camera traps, I mean, generally the mammals that live up in the canopy tend to be smaller bodied anyway, but the way that you set the camera traps, it seems to quite effectively pick up smaller mammals as well as larger ones. So I've used camera traps as my method of studying arboreal mammals of any size. It's not perfect yet. There's still lots of modifications to do, and as Sui said, there's there's pros and cons of any method. Another way of sampling arboreal rodents would be ground-based surveys, line transects, but those have, particularly in Borneo, which has got really very tall rainforests, those have got a number of problems because most of the small mammals are small, most of them are camouflage coloration, and they don't really want to be around humans, so they'll run off way before we've got an ID. I tried using fur traps as well, which is this kind of, it's a plastic funnel and you put bait at the end, but the bait, it can't be reached, but it can be felt, and it's lined, the funnel is lined with a sort of a sticky substance, and the idea is that the mammal goes in, tries to get to the bait, leaves a few furs or hairs on the substrate, and then you can test that in a lab later and find out what species it was. But these have been quite successful in temperate regions, but I think there's just too many species in Borneo. That it seemed to be that only one species really out of about 34 squirrel species was going into them, and also a lot of the squirrels tried to eat them from the outside and not actually go in, which was really annoying. So I kind of gave up on those as a method. I think you could also do the kind of trapping that Sui does, the live trapping. You could do that in the canopy, but it would be really labor intensive. You've got to check the traps every day because otherwise the mammals might die, and to set them up, I mean, it's labor intensive enough on the ground, so we will know that. So it's to then have to climb the trees, to get a good enough sample size, you'd need a huge team and a lot of resources. It's not impossible, but you would need quite a lot of funding. So generally I've been finding that camera trapping is pretty good actually for sort of a range of arboreal mammals. But again, as Sui said, there's no one size fits all for everything.
I think the live trapping on canopy will work out better if you do it on canopy walkways like they did in Poring. That's why Dr. Henry has done so much work there. And I think if more canopy walkways are out there, doing live trapping would be slightly easier there. By the way, Jess is a researcher as well from SAFE project, and she does arboreal mammals. That's what Sui has commented, which is true. Chen Hong has a question. Should we be concerned about the presence of invasive species in a logged forest, since there are more small mammal species in a logged forest?
Oh, that's a good question. So we had a researcher do that as a master's project, and he found out he detected quite a number of rhasis. So the rats that we get in the city, the ugly and less charismatic rats. He detected the presence of them, obviously a few in oil palm and also in log forest. But over the years, he detected them, I think, if I may be wrong, I have to check the literature again, around 2014, 2015, there was, he detected a few individuals, but over the years, since 2016 till now, we've not even detected a single individual in the log forest. So they could be there, but probably in very low numbers that we are not picking up. And we were initially concerned that, yes, I mean, in other other ecosystems and stuff. With the increasing disturbance, you get increasingly number of invasive species taking over and competing with the local species. But for now, we're not seeing this as the case for the mammal communities, the small mammals at our forest at least.
Sui, do you think it depends on how close the logged forest is to human habitation as to whether there's invasive species?
Yes, I think so. They're more dependent on like human settlements for food. And so probably, I think they're probably less able to, so supposedly they're supposed to be very aggressive and able to compete. But I mean, in our log forest, that is quite far away from any human settlements except for our camp. We're not seeing that as the case. So maybe we'll detect more of them closer to oil palm, is what I think.
Yeah, thanks.
Does anybody have any more questions or comments? Okay, there's another question from Chun. Is SAFE project site open to those who are collaborating with SURF only, or other researchers can go in as well? I used to assist under the SAFE Bali project, but never got the chance to visit SAFE itself.
Is this Chun asking?
Yes, that's his question in the chat box. He's
Oh,
nodding his head.
and you can, so if anyone is really, so we are close to visitors and to the general public, but if anyone is really keen to do research or do a short visit, like to do mammal watching and stuff, you could apply for a look-see permit and come in for a few days, or you can just try contacting me and then we can work things out off the record.
Thank you. I have a question. It's not really that technical and interesting like the others. So while writing this mammal books of Borneo, we had a contribution by Honey Roll of Maximus tajudin. This beautiful rat species. I love it. Do we have that in SAFE? Have you seen it in SAFE or in Hawaii?
So all this while I've been using the old mammal book by Payne to ID my mammals, and then there wasn't a Maximus tajudin back then. We just called it white hair dye, and now when I bought the new mammal book, I found out, hey, there's a newly described species of Maximus tajudin, which is done by, I think, genetic splitting of the genetic work. So we still call the Maximus, we'll just generalize them to Maximus white hair dye, because we have not done much genetic work to actually understand if they're subspecies, if they're split species. So we need to update on our species.
Yes. So Jaya Raj has commented, you may want to check the current taxonomy of murids and other rodents.
Yeah.
True.
So we do also, to add to that, we actually do collect ear DNA samples. So we are planning to send all those DNA samples for testing eventually. So of every individual we've caught, we collect tissue samples, mainly of the rats. Yeah.
Does anybody else wants to ask anything else? Okay, so if there are no more, any more questions? Anybody? Yes, no? Okay. So